Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another lesson in the Torah portion with the Rebbe's teaching. Today we study the portion of Bo from the book Selections from Likutei Sichos, the first talk on Bo. So I am going to many parts share with you in summary instead of reading, so we can get to many points the Rebbe is making. This is one talk of the Rebbe that is bringing different topics and bring them in to connect them with the main theme. So we begin with this week's Torah portion. In the portion of Bo, we read about the last three plagues, and they are locust, darkness, and the death of firstborn. The death of firstborn is unique. It caused Pharaoh to kick the Jews out of Egypt. Also, the first mitzvah in the Torah appears in this week's Torah portion, which is Rosh Chodesh. Regarding we are going to concentrate on the death of firstborn that happened the night of Passover, on the 14th at night when we celebrate Passover. The Seder takes place the night where the Jewish people were, or the Egyptian firstborn were killed. They were not allowed to leave their homes, and they only left Egypt in the middle of the day, the next morning. But the death of firstborn, the straw that broke the camel's back, that caused Pharaoh to chase the Jewish people out, happened on the 14th at night. Here is the Rebbe. When Moshe Rabbeinu delivered God's message concerning the impending plague of the firstborn to Pharaoh, he also told Pharaoh when the plague would occur, at midnight. Nevertheless, Moshe did not use the precise term and says that the plague would take place around midnight. Kachatzot, not bachatzot. Bachatzot means at midnight. God said bachatzot, at midnight. Moshe says kachatzot, bet and kaf. Kachatzot mean around. Why? Because it was possible that Pharaoh's astrologers would err, not be able to pinpoint the exact time at midnight. Then they could have claimed that Moshe's prophecy had not been fulfilled. But Moshe tells Pharaoh when it will take place. When will it take place? At midnight. He told Pharaoh around midnight so that no one should say that he did not, the prophecy was not delivered just because of their error, because it's a split of a second at midnight. Says the Rebbe, the first question. An explanation is required. Why was it at all necessary to inform Pharaoh of the time at which the plague of the firstborn was to begin? Moshe could have simply said, as had been his practice with the other plagues, that God would bring this plague upon Egypt without specifying when it would occur. We don't find that he told them, Pharaoh, on blood, frogs, lice, wild beasts, any other plague. There was no specific time. Only here he tells them exact time when it will happen. The fact that Moshe did mention the time when the plague of the firstborn would occur indicates that the plague of the firstborn has a unique connection to the hour of midnight, so much so that Moshe had to tell Pharaoh when it would take place. And the only reason he changed and says around midnight is because to make sure no one will say that his prophecy or not fulfilled. In other words, when Moshe is warning him about the death of firstborn, this warning, this plague, is specifically connected with midnight, as opposed to other plagues. Blood can be at 7 a.m., at 8 p.m., at 11 a.m., it doesn't matter. Frogs can be at 9 p.m., 9:30. The plague would affect as well. Firstborn will not have an impact on Pharaoh unless it's happening at midnight precisely. The plague of the firstborn was also distinguished from the previous plagues by two additional factors. Says the Rebbe, there are two other points in which the death of firstborn are unique. In contrast to the earlier plagues, it was necessary for the Jews to mark their houses on the two doorposts and on the lintel with the distinguishing sign, with the blood of circumcision and the blood of Pesach sacrifice, so that the plague that would strike the Egyptian would not harm the Jews.
Blood of circumcision?
Yeah, they had to circumcise themselves. We read in the Agada God says if you are rel lo yochal bo, if you're uncircumcised, you cannot partake in the Paschal offering. Anyone who did not partake in the Paschal offering did not leave Egypt. So they had vayvor alayich v'orech misbeseses bedomaich. Says Rashi, domaich, two bloods before they left Egypt. One was in their body because they were not circumcised, and the second is the Passover sacrifice.
When would they have circumcised?
At the day before.
And they could get out and walk away.
Yeah, they were strong men at the time.
That's a serious miracle right there.
Ah,
That's a serious miracle.
it's a whole medrashim. Harry, you should tell him there is a reign of medrashes about the circumcision. How did Moshe convince them? He told the Jews, the Levite tribe, those who were circumcised, to grill or to put on the grill the Passover, and there was an aroma of heaven that came. Right, Harry? You familiar with the medrash? Harry agrees. He's the medrash master.
There might be some.
And the aroma came that the Jews came and said, we want also. It must be the tastiest steak we ever had. And Moshe said, of course, take off your pants and let's circumcise you. And they says that they all circumcised themselves. All for a meal. A heavenly meal. Can we go back?
That's the midrash. What's you want the real story now?
For 40,
the people that were born.
for 40 years, they did not circumcise, and they did not have a sacrifice of Passover. Passover sacrifice was only done twice in the desert. Once the year after they left Egypt, and the second is just before they enter, which happened to me the eve of Pesach. On Pesach day, I believe they crossed the Jordan. So Pharaoh says it's time, and he made a mound, a pile of the foreskin.
This is good. How did Pharaoh wind up getting this loot?
Now, says the Rebbe, in order for a Jew to be spared the plague of firstborn, they had to make a sign, so God will not cause them any harm. What is the sign? Smearing blood on both doorpost and on the lintel. There are a lot of medrashim about that and what it represents, but that's not the discussion here. Where did the blood come from? From two mitzvot that they fulfilled. One on their body, circumcision, and the men fulfilled this mitzvah for the women. And the second is Passover sacrifice, which is the god of the Egyptians, and they had to literally endanger their life to slaughter the gods of the Egyptians. By doing so, they had to put a sign that they trust and they believe in God. This is a protection for the Jewish people who are inside the house. And the Rebbe is asking, why was there no protection when it comes to frogs and hail and locust? Why only here?
Didn't bother.
Huh?
Because they didn't have it.
Who didn't have it?
They didn't. The frogs didn't come to Goshen.
First, there were Jews who lived outside of Goshen.
But it didn't bother them.
Second, why? That's my question. How come they were spared without making a sign, and by firstborn they had to make a sign? Number 2b, God orders the Jews, no man shall go out of the entrance of his house until the morning. The Jews were required not to leave their homes throughout the night. For once the agent of destruction is given license to wreak havoc, it does not differentiate between the righteous and the wicked. Had the Jews gone out, they too could have been harmed. Says Rebbe, I don't understand. Here is the Rebbe. The latter point is somewhat problematic. The Jews did not suffer any harm from the earlier plagues. Those only affected the Egyptians. Similarly, the agent of destruction was given license to wreak havoc with regards to those other plagues as well. And yet the Jews did not require any special protection. Why was the plague of firstborn unique in that regard? Number 1, why was it necessary for the Jews to both remain at home and make a sign with the blood of the circumcision and the Pesach sacrifice? And what is the distinction between these two measures of protection? So the Rebbe is asking, we have 3 questions in general. They're split into details, but let's stick to 3. The first one, Moshe tells Pharaoh, the next plague is going to be at midnight. What's at midnight? Why the other ones there was no time? The second, he tells the Jews that in order for them to be protected, they need a sign on the doorpost from sacrifice and of Passover and for circumcision. In addition, he tells them they have to remain inside their home. If they leave their home, they can get harmed. Why? Because once the agent of destruction receives permission to wreak havoc, he will not distinguish between righteous and wicked. How come it didn't happen in hail? How come it didn't happen in darkness? The Jewish people, anywhere they went, the darkness did not affect them. They saw. Why was this unique? And then the Rebbe's last question is, what are the uniqueness of those two protection? Yes. I just want to stick to the topic because we have so much to cover, and there will be side topics as well coming up, and they will all come together into the same idea. Yes.
The angel will wreak havoc. They said, "Ani v'lo malach." God was the one who did it.
A very simple, very famous question.
So he would know.
The Rebbe, I believe, would address it. I'm not sure, but the answer is that God was there with Malach HaMavis, with the agent of destruction. But we'll see what the Rebbe has to say. I just want to stick to the topic, please. Raja, you had a
No, I was just thinking, could it be that that the other plagues were acts direct from God, and the death of the firstborn was done through an agent instruction from
So
God?
you say perhaps the others were through God, and therefore God knew very well which one.
Right, exactly.
And the firstborn was through an agent, and the agent have no idea.
Exactly.
Actually, it was the exact opposite. God says, when it comes to Egypt to kill the firstborn, ani v'lo malach, me and not an agent, me no angel, no agent. In other words, it's quite opposite. That in other plagues there was an agent, there was other angels who caused the punishment. But when it comes to the firstborn, it's God Himself. And I address Harry's question: if it's God Himself, why is it called the agent of destruction? And the answer is that the agent of destruction came with God and was there with God affecting.
It was there to be a nudge.
I think it has to do with free choice of the Jews. You know,
Which means,
well, they were told what they were supposed to do. They had a free choice to either follow it or not follow it.
but the question is, why suddenly number 10? What's wrong with why in number 7 and 8 and 9, as well as the first few, there was no such thing as free choice?
Because the tent was more destructive than any other.
It was more destructive than any others. Okay, it's a good answer, but still it does not accommodate that the previous one had the agent of destruction was there, and yet he knew exactly which one, who is Jewish and which one. But by the way, he had a GPS. He knew exactly which home to go and where to go.
There was a woman.
The Rebbe is going to address this, and the Rebbe is going to answer that, and then the Rebbe is going to get a little deeper and a little deeper and a little deeper. Let's see how many layers we can go. The difference between the plague of the firstborn and other plagues can be explained as follows. With regards to the other plagues, it cannot be said that the agent of destruction was given license to wreak havoc, because most of the plagues affected only the financial resources of the comfort of the Egyptians. Even when a plague, that is the plague of wild animals, brought death in addition to financial loss, unlimited license was not granted to the agent of destruction, and the resulting destruction was constrained. For example, in other words, what the Rebbe says, and I think somebody pointed out, the Rebbe says the other plagues were mostly about financial loss, blood that they had to buy water, frogs that they couldn't rest, they couldn't go to work, and they couldn't travel by car, they couldn't go around because it was flood. There was no killing and destroying them. The only exception was the wild beast, and even the wild beast was very limited. They killed only according to their nature. In other words, it was very, very limited. So when a lion was fully satiated, he ate enough, he would stop eating. He wouldn't kill. So the destruction it brought, it really killed, but very limited. In addition, the Rebbe points out in the comment in the comments, even the plague which killed the livestock, dever, boil, was limited. Firstly, it affected only livestock, and moreover, it affected only 5 types of beasts: horses, donkeys, camels, oxen, and sheep. So they had dogs, they had cats, it didn't kill them. They had snakes, it didn't kill. It only killed 5 types of livestock, and in addition, it killed only livestock, but it didn't kill the humans. In other words, the Rebbe says, if you look at the nature of the other 9 plagues, it was very finite, limited, and mostly about financial loss. With regards to the final plague, by contrast, blanket permission was given. There was no restrictions as to how the Egyptian firstborn ought to be killed. Therefore, since the agent of destruction was given license to wreak havoc, it was necessary for the Jews to protect themselves lest they also be harmed. So that's the first answer, the first point that we make. Ali, do you understand that?
Good.
So the first point that Rabbi says, when it comes to firstborn, he said to him, they will get killed. He didn't say how. You know why? Everybody died differently. Some died while they're on their bed. Some died while they're falling off the window. Some died because they fell into a fire. Some died because the wall fell on their heads. Everybody died because once you have an agent of destruction who get granted permission, he's using he has a big fat toolbox of getting rid of people. Because firstborn was unique, where permission was granted to the agent of destruction, that's why the Jews had to have a specific protection. Otherwise, they would have been included in that plague.
So the agent of
So that's the
destruction
person with God, accompanied by God.
Okay.
But God gave them the permission, granted them permission, an unlimited permission. So therefore, it did not limit the type of the way they should be killed to a specific
Who
way.
did the actual killing, God or the angel?
The agent of God on behalf of God, with God. A deeper distinction. So it does not answer all the questions yet, but that's the first distinction between the first and the other 9. Now the Rebbe says, let's go one layer deeper. A deeper distinction can be made between the final plague and the 9 earlier ones. The primary intent of the earlier plagues was not to punish the Egyptians, but to generate an awareness of God. As it is written, here are some quotes. Through this, you will know that I'm God. And also it's written, so that you know that I'm God. And another text, it's all about the warning to Pharaoh, so that you will know that there is none like me. Therefore, there was no need for the plagues to affect the Jews, for the Jews already possessed an awareness of God. Says the Rebbe, if you pay attention to the 9 plagues, the first 9, not the last one, they are unique, where the purpose of the plagues was not to punish the Egyptians. It was to make them aware there is a God. And therefore it was done with lice, which the witchcraft makers had no control. The blood, that they couldn't do it at a specific time. There was a lot of times they say it's God's finger, if you pay attention. In other words, the purpose was not to punish them and kill the Egyptians, it was there to prove that there is a God. The Jews didn't need that point because they had that in their family. Therefore, it did not affect, the plagues did not affect the Jews. The plague of the firstborn was different in this regard. Why? In the 9 other plagues, the vast majority of those who suffered did not perish. Thus, they could still come to an awareness of God and personally benefit from it. God did not want them to die because he wanted them to go and say there is a God and tell everybody there is a God. So you hurt them, but not in a way of killing them. With the plague of the firstborn, however, the intent was that the firstborn be entirely eliminated and not that their awareness of God be enhanced. Here, it's a punishment. If it's a punishment, the best punishment is to get rid of them. Since the intent of this plague was punishment, it was necessary to prevent the possibility of the attributes of judgment claiming, how are these, the Jews, different from these, the Egyptians, firstborn? The question did not involve a point of fact. Obviously, God knew whether the Jews had sinned or not. Instead, the question focused on whether the Jews are worthy of punishment. During their exile of Egypt, in Egypt, the Jews had also sunk into evil conduct and were mired in klippah, in idol worship, as our sages state. These are worshippers of idols, and these are worshippers of idols. Therefore, there was grounds for an agent of destruction to the extension of the attributes of judgment, not to allow for a distinction to be made between Egyptian and the Jew. Did you understand that? It's common sense. Says the Rebbe, when it comes to firstborn, it's a punishment for their misbehaving and not listening to God. The Jewish people, unfortunately, were mired in klippah. They worship idols, as the agent of, as the prosecutor up in heaven says, these are idol worshippers, and here, these are idol worshippers. So why are you distinguishing between two? Therefore, once you have an agent, the agent of destruction received permission to wreak havoc. As we know, he killed in many ways. There was a fear, there was a chash, there was a possibility that this agent of destruction will affect also the firstborn of the Jewish people. Therefore, God said they have to stay home and they have to create a protection of the two mitzvot that God gave them. True, it is written, I will pass through Egypt, I will smite every firstborn, I will perform acts of judgment, I am God. And from this verse, our sages conclude that God himself was the one who smote the Egyptians. As the sages says, I am not an angel, I and no other. Nevertheless, God's direct involvement did not nullify the influence of the agent of destruction. It was also present and could level accusations against the Jewish people. Therefore, it was necessary for the Jews to take protection measures to shield themselves from it. Says Rabbi, the Rabbi is addressing the question that Harry had and I already answered. Even though we read in the text, when it comes to firstborn, I would go down, I would take the firstborn. And the sage says, I and no agent. In other words, this is the only plague that God himself was involved. However, when God came for destruction, he brought with him Malach HaMoves, the angel of death, the agent of destruction. And once he gave him permission to go and wreak havoc, there was a possibility for that agent of destruction to cause destruction among the Jews. Therefore, they needed extra protection. That's text in the Haggadah. Thank you. These measures were twofold. Now they needed to create two types of protections, right? Two types of protection. Actually, it's two bloods. One to post a sign, to put a sign on the doorpost and lintel, and the other is to circumcise. Not live in their homes, since the agent of destruction was given unbridled license to wreak havoc throughout the land of Egypt. If a Jew would have gone outside, no distinction would have held. With regards to this, everyone, Jews and Egyptians, were alike, for it does not differentiate. A sign would not help. The only alternative was to stay inside. Says Rabbi, once you go out, the agent of destruction would say, oh, this guy is a firstborn. Let's get rid of him. Placing a sign on the Jews' homes, God had promised, I will pass over you. Accordingly, only limited jurisdiction was granted to the agent of destruction. It was not given license in these protected places, thereby allowing differentiation between the Jews and the Egyptians. However, that distinction requires a sign. Says the Rebbe, God has created certain places and he told them, do not enter. And that do not enter is the blood sign. It's a red sign, a stop, don't enter. So therefore they needed two. One, not to be outside, because once they're outside, the agent of destruction wreak havoc and he can catch up to them. Two, stay home, because their home will be protected. Now, the Rebbe says that this is not so satisfactory to all the questions. I'm giving summary because I want to move on. The Rebbe says the answer is still not there, because how is it possible that because they put a sign, the agent of destruction had no right to enter the house and cause havoc. After all, they were idol worshippers. They were the same as the Egyptians. So what these signs would make, and what if an Egyptian made a sign, they took blood from the Jew and they did it, it wouldn't protect them. And therefore, we need to understand how come that those signs have caused the protection of the Jewish people. Says the Rebbe, that's the very reason that God himself had to come down. God has an unlimited love for his children. So no matter how far they go and no matter how bad they behave, and if you put their record next to an Egyptian record, they're equally the same. You won't see a distinction between one to the other. But God has chose the Jewish people, not for their uniqueness, not because they're special, not because loving God, because that's God's choice. And there is no specific reason to point out why God chose the Jewish people. And therefore God says, I myself am going there. Once God is there, he allowed the Jewish people to be spared. That explains why God had to go down with the agent of destruction. Because the agent of destruction would say, he's a worshiper, idol worshiper, here's idol worshiper. What's the signs have to do with that? They all should be getting the plague. God says, no, I'm coming, I'm going, I'm punishing, I'm taking the lives. Because God says, these are my children, skip. These are my children, skip. Now, if the Jew did not have the sign, that's a different, he removed the protection that God offered them. Yes.
In comparison to people, but even the Jews had something to the 49th level of Tumah, like Egyptians, they did not act like Egyptians. They didn't kill, murder, do wrong things for Egyptians, it's the Jews. So they couldn't be compared. They shouldn't be compared.
This is a debate in the Midrash about the level of spirituality or tumah of the Jewish people. However, it is clearly stated that had the Jews stayed an extra minute in Egypt, they would have never come out, meaning they sunk to as close as possible to the level of Egyptians. Yeah, there is a distinction, but that distinction is so minute that a minute later, just being there, would have made them in the 50th gate of impurity. They were at the 49th gate. So it's not so simple. Okay, yet we know that they kept their family unit and they kept their Hebrew names and they kept the language. But as I said, the other Midrash says that they were idol worshippers. The answer would be, and I think the other commentators explain that it depends. Some Jews were that very far. By the way, I saw that in last week's portion, the Torah started counting the Jewish people. And it counts only the first three tribes, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and then it stops. Va'era, the beginning of last week. Why are these three tribes are counted, and then you don't read about Yehuda, Issachar, Zvulun? Many commentators, not one, many commentators explain that all the other tribes have totally sunk into the Egyptian lifestyle. Completely. Whatever the Midrash said that they kept the language and they kept their Hebrew names and they kept the way they were dressed, meaning family lifestyle, it was only the first three, no one else. Just a minute, Roger. I want to stick to the topic because
Sticking to the topic, Rabbi.
Huh?
My mind is going a bit. Could it be that God was by performing this mitzvah it's God's way of preparing the Jews for obedience, for a mindset of obedience because of the Exodus?
of course, that could be, that's part of the reason. We call it Kabbalat Ol, to accept God's yoke
Right.
and to listen and obey God, even at times when they are endangering themselves.
And also to cleanse the Jewish nation of the
And to-
disobedient ones.
Right. It's part of the retraining.
Right.
Dick, did you raise your hand?
If it's out of bounds, tell me, what about the 80% that stayed behind?
Right. What about
Are they
them?
part of this process, or are they totally beyond assimilation and outside the protection?
So the 80% died in the plague of darkness. So they were not part of this discussion. Thank you for pointing it out. Since, I'm reading on page 122. Since the intent of this plague was punishment, it was necessary to prevent the possibility of the attribute of judgment claiming, how are these? We studied that, right? Because the 10th plague was unique, it's all about punishment. If you bring punishment to the Egyptians, bring punishment to the Jews, they act the same. And then the Rebbe says, let's go a little bit further. Why actually there is a distinction? Says Rebbe, because that's why God himself needed to come down to Egypt to met out the punishment of firstborn, because he loves the Jewish people for no reason. Because if you follow the code, if you follow the conduct, you will not find a distinction between Egyptian and Jew. But God loves the children, his children, and therefore he saved them. Now, says the Rebbe, that can explain midnight. This also, page 124, this also explains why the plague of the firstborn took place exactly at midnight. The level of godliness that transcends the limits of Seder Ishtalshelus is revealed at midnight. Here is a summary of the rabbi as saying, the nighttime is divided into two parts. The first part is called Gvurot. Gvura is judgment, severity. That's why we do not say Tehillim. There is a place not. There is a Jewish tradition not to give tzedakah at night unless you have a beggar who needs help. But not to do that because it's the time of severity. It's no kindness. What happens at midnight? At midnight, it turned into kindness because it will begin the light. The light represents
darker, the first half is getting
second half will get lighter. So the first part of the night is strictness. The second part of the night is kindness. God's action had to be in such a way that brings suffering or kill the firstborn of the Egyptians, but saving the Jewish people. In other words, at the same time, the same act will cause gvura, strictness to the Egyptians, and kindness to the Jewish people. It cannot be on any other part of the day except at midnight exactly. Only God knows when midnight is. There is a dispute. What is midnight? Either God made that midnight extend, which is beyond measurement, and the other, or it was exactly no time actually, because midnight, it's like a line that either it's part of darkness or it's part of light. There's no, but God knows. Only God can tell you when that happened, and it happened just at midnight. So much more so that Moshe said around midnight, because he knew that they wouldn't be, the sorcerers, the astrologers wouldn't be able to pinpoint exactly, because there's no such thing as such a time. What's so unique about that? What do you mean there's no such time? It's called the above limitation of the universe. This is a period where in this universe you won't find. It doesn't exist. God is able to affect the universe at that precise moment. And that's why it cannot be done earlier or later. Why is it crucial to tell Pharaoh? He tells Pharaoh, now you're going to get punished. It's the last time you're going to see me. And the punishment, if Pharaoh would say, what about the Jewish people? They should be punished too. They worship idols. That's why he tells them exactly what time it will happen. It was necessary to make it happen at that time. And it was necessary to tell Pharaoh in the warning that when it will happen, so he should know that it will not affect the Jewish people. Is that clear?
Then he said, around midnight.
Right. So we call it above Ishtalshelut. Ishtalshelut means the chain of reaction of the universe, natural reaction, natural order of creation. Above the natural order is called miraculous, or above nature. Above nature means it's not finite. It's not limited to time or space or body. And therefore it tells them at midnight or around midnight to tell them that this act is unique, that God himself has to do it, because God is going to affect this plague at the same time to save the Jewish people and to hurt the Egyptian. And that there is no time in this universe because it's either severity or kindness. After all, the Jewish people are equal to the Egyptians.
At midnight, that gets suspended. It makes that change.
So there is another talk of the Rebbe where there are two opinions. One say that nothing had changed in the universe, and God was precisely at midnight and he knew how to do it in what we call no time. If a time is a line, every second is on the belt, right? There's no such thing as midnight, because the one before is before midnight, the one after is after midnight. But that's only to a finite human being that is constrained by time. For God, there is no such constraint. There is no such limitation. So he was able to. The second opinion is that God stretched that moment. In other words, in the units of time, he paused the time. In other words, he made time stop where the night, the first part is left already, and the second part did not start yet. I hope I made myself clear. These are two distinctions that the Rebbe is talking about. Maybe next year we'll talk about it. I want to go back to our discussion. In order for the Jewish people to receive that blessing of God, his love, that's above chain of reaction of the universe, that's very unique, that has to be at a specific period. I cannot call it specific time because that time does not exist. The Jewish people also had to show their unbound love towards God. How do they do that? Says the Rebbe, with the blood of circumcision and the blood of Passover, because both of them represent outside the chain of common sense. We call it lemala, above, tam vadat, common sense. What is circumcision, says the Rebbe? When do a child get circumcised? When he has no mind. He cannot protest. Why shouldn't we do a circumcision when he's 13? Why? And actually, I think the Muslims, they do when he was 3 years old or 13. They do it at a much later point. The Jews are the only one who do it at 8 days when children have no say, period. The reason is because when you make a covenant, what's the covenant? A covenant is no matter what happens, nothing will break between us. Even if you hurt me, even if you don't help me, I'll always be together. We'll be together. That's a covenant. So the covenant God made with the Jewish people was done at a time when they cannot participate, so to say, with the cognitive ability. They don't even think straight. Only 8 days, the moment that they are out of danger, that cutting to the foreskin will kill them, that's when they do it. Because the bond of circumcision was there to demonstrate that their bond with God is above nature, is above the chain of natural conduct. And that's why it was necessary for God to act in the same way and come at midnight. The second sign they needed was the Passover sacrifice. And we know that they put their life on the line because it was the gods of the Egyptians. And they had to take it, the only time God commanded them to take it 4 days earlier, on the 10th of Nisan, which was Shabbat. The Shabbat was not given yet. They had to take it on Shabbat and tell the Egyptians, there is the sound of goats and sheep all over Goshen and Egypt, Egyptian homes and tents. Egyptians asked him, why I said we're going to slaughter it. This would have caused the Egyptian to kill them. Yet the Jewish people put their life on the line. In other words, those two signs, the signs of these two bloods, were as a demonstration that they, on their part, also bind themselves with God above common sense, above an understanding. We call it faith. Vaya'amen Hashem. It says that when Moshe gave them the order, it's in this expulsion, to go and purchase sheep and tie it and prepare for the 14. It says, Vaya'amen Hashem, Vaya'amen Ha'am, the people believe, Vayishmu, and they heard, Kipokad Hashem, that Hashem is coming to take them out, because they knew that's after that night they're going to be out. In other words, the idea of emunah, it's not trust, faith. The faith is no common sense. It doesn't make sense. Convince me to have faith in God. I say I cannot convince you, because you do have faith. You just have to find it. There are things that you can prove. Faith is not where you can prove something. If you can prove something, you don't need faith. Right, Ali? Okay, so this is the point I wanted about the exact time of midnight. In number 6, he's talking about there are two types, there are two ways in which God can affect nature in a miracle way. Says the Rebbe that part of the reason, the conclusion of the Rebbe's talk right now, says the Rebbe, the part of the reason that God actually accepted to save the Jewish people and come in a certain situation where there is no day, and it's not first part of the night, not second part, is because of the Jewish people's faith in God. The more we have faith in Mashiach, the closer we get. And therefore, by saying, I believe in the coming of Mashiach, I wait for the coming of Mashiach, it will hasten the coming of Mashiach, just like it was in Egypt, that now, for the first time, they believed in Moshe, and they believed that God is going to take them out, and that's what made them serve God in a very unusual way. Circumcision and sacrifices were great sacrifices they had to do, but and it brought the redemption. So too, in the last redemption, which God hopefully will take us out of Galus. Thank you so much.
Discussion before we go on.